Okay, hi everybody. My name is Michael Casey. I am, in another life, I'm the Chief Content Officer at CoinDesk, which is to say I'm a media guy, I'm a journalist most of my time. And so usually in these situations, I'm sort of the neutral moderator, just asking tough questions of the panelists. A little different this time because I'm a sort of participant in this discussion in the sense that the man to my left here, Frank McCourt, had brought me in to help him write a book that's coming out in March that deals in part with some of the questions we'll be talking about today. So it's called Our Biggest Fight, so look out for it. March 12th is when it's due out. But this is really a conversation that really drills more deeply into the sort of the human, particularly the childhood impact of the internet. Our book is really about the broader implications of the internet, with this being a subset of that. So we've got a tremendous panel. I mentioned Frank. Frank is the executive chairman of McCourt Global. He's the founder of Project Liberty and and co-author of this book. And Dr. Gaia Bernstein, who's the co-director of the Gibbons Institute of Law Science and Technology at Seton University School of Law. And Dr. Mitch Prinstein, who's the chief science officer for the American Psychological Association. So, Mitch, I thought I might just throw to you, you sort of drilled into the science aspect of what social media's impact has been on children, and you've been involved in sort of laying out some guidelines as to how to think about that. Maybe just bring everybody up to speed on what the current sort of scientific thinking is around that.
Sure. I'm wearing a couple different hats at the Winston Center at UNC Chapel Hill. We are knowledge producers, where we are doing some of the research on this topic. But then simultaneously at the American Psychological Association, we were commissioned to put together a research synthesis of what we know so far. And what that research says from the scientific community at large, and that was the APA Health Advisory on Social Media and Adolescent Mental Health. What we found is that the conversation around social media in some ways was becoming a little bit too simplistic and a little bit lacking some of the nuance of what scientists have come to understand. It's not that social media is all the same thing for every single person, and it is also the case that different kids might react in different ways. So what we did is we really thought about social media as the constituent parts of the content kids are exposed to, the features that are unique to social media, like the like button, follower count, endless scroll, and also the AI. And from there, we were able to identify about 10 different areas where we saw that there was enough evidence to clearly suggest, in most cases, risks that were linked to social media use and the specific design of social media, not how much time you spend on it, and not just that kids are exposed to the content at all. It's built into the platforms themselves that there are risks.
Okay, so once again, we've used the word platforms, right? There's, and we can sort of identify these platforms. Really there's 5 really big ones, and the extent to which they run the digital world is absolutely, to me, astounding. And so maybe, Gaia, you could weigh in here, because now that we know these risks and we sort of start to see it happening, how do we go after them? How do we get them to change in a way that's not doing this horrendous harm to our children?
So I think the basic thing is they don't want to change, because they exist by building revenue on our time, on us staying online for as long as possible so they can sell advertising, target advertising to us. So they do not have the incentive to do so. And I think there has to be legal pressure from different directions in order to, first of all, try to eliminate some of the addictive designs that they're using. And secondly, try to make the business model they're using less lucrative, less profitable, because it's becoming much more difficult. And I don't think there's one way to do this. I think that, as has been in the past in other fights against tobacco, against junk food, there has to be a wide range of legal measures in order to push things to a point where we can start building the internet with new imagination, with new business models, with new content. I think right now it's very difficult for any startups to come up with new ideas because it's hard to get in this environment.
So, Frank, I know you're going to have some thoughts on that. opportunities in startup environments if we think through the technology. But just to go a little bit deeper on this, Gaia, because I like the fact you mentioned that it can't be one single approach. And I think the complexity of the situation here for me is that, and we were talking about this with Tamika, a colleague, on the way here, we were thinking about big tobacco and how it is a very interesting analogy, right? The same addictive thing, the same sort of denialism that went on, and then a massive realization that this was a problem, and then action that happened with that. But I think one of the key differences is that, yes, there was big tobacco had money in the sense that it could influence the political process. In this case, big tech has both money, but it also has the political process. Like, social media is a fundamental piece of how our government runs, right? So how do we deal with that? How do we deal with this really difficult circular situation that we're in terms of getting politicians to take action?
Well, I think on that point, I'm quite optimistic, because I think it's one of the only issues, at least in the US, that we are seeing bipartisan consent. We're seeing both Republicans and Democrats acting together. And I think the reason we're seeing it is they're all parents. And they're seeing the same thing. They have a kid, and the kid is happy and playing, and suddenly they lose control, and the kid is staying on their screen all day, and there's nothing we can do about it. I started working on this. I ran an outreach program to parents, and my law students spoke to kids in 2017, which was really, really early. And I really, at that point, I thought all we needed to do was tell people that there's a problem here, that we're spending too much time online, and I'll talk about self-help measures, how you have to tell kids not to use the phone in certain areas, not in the bedroom, not during dinner time, maybe use some parental controls, and all will be fine. And I think a year later, well, there was much more awareness at that point from different whistleblowers. Nothing has really changed. The parents just became more powerless and defeated, saying there's nothing we can do. And I was at that time planning to write a book, and I wrote a very different book, a book that focuses on how we can apply pressure on companies. And so I think my optimism comes from parents. I believe that parents want to push this through.
And that's certainly, I mean, Frank, been a big motivator for you and a big part of the Project Liberty outreach as well. I mean, we just, my own little anecdote in this, we started, a part of the book does indeed deal with these horrific losses that these parents have had to deal with. And we met some of the mothers who are the spokespeople for this. And in one section of the book, in an early draft, and only in a matter of a month or two, it started off, I had 15 names at the bottom of that letter signing for the Kids Online Safety Act. And there were like 15 mothers and fathers who'd put their names to it and the name of their child and the age of the child that they died. And we listed the names of those kids in the book. And then when we came to do the second draft, that online letter had just gone from 15 to 75. And so this feels like there's action. It feels like, but I tell you, writing down every one of those names and the age of the child, it tears you apart, right? So that's why you get resonance. That's why people, because you're right, they get that. So Frank, it's been a key part of your, but I think where you're focused, of course, is yes, that social movement, yes, that political pressure part of it, but there is a tech solution that needs to be entered into this. Why don't you lay out what that's all about?
First of all, can everybody hear me without the microphone? Or is that helpful? Okay. Thanks, Michael, and it's great to be with both of you here. And I do want to acknowledge Margarita, my partner in football, and acknowledge her work at putting all this together and bringing us all here. So we know the harms now, right? There's lots of research. Yeah, maybe there's more to be done, but those of us with kids know what's going on because we see it, sense it, feel it. We see the changes. And we see it all around us, as you point out. And of course, we want to slow down the pace of the damage, and regulation is useful. But one of the conclusions I've reached is that it's not enough. We need to fix what's fundamentally broken with the internet. So I come from a family of builders. So our business has been around for 131 years. We build things, including, by the way, internet systems. And if you think about the internet and just what it is and how it evolved, it's been built on relatively thin layer protocols that did really big things. So in 1983, when scientists and researchers primarily adopted TCP/IP, two protocols that were co-joined, suddenly all the these computers were connected. So you had this network of networks and this awesome idea of this thing called the internet. And then 10 years later, roughly, Tim Bernstein and his colleagues came up with the idea of let's connect the data regardless of which device it's on. Another thin protocol, HTTP. And we all adopted it, kind of believing that this was a really good thing for everybody and that there were responsible people that wouldn't allow bad things to happen, or at least call them out and so forth. And so we had this big thing called the World Wide Web. And then this web era was very short-lived because we soon entered this era, the app age, the killer apps, which resulted in some big platforms. Michael, you referred to them. There's only 4 or 5 that actually are dominating the landscape. Not all social media platforms, but this is what happened. And something that was intended to be very open, very fair, very good, and connect us all as human beings and create unlimited access to knowledge and all this, and be good for kids and adults, by the way, became something very different. And as you point out, there was a business model that was adopted, and suddenly it became a highly centralized, autocratic, surveillance-based internet. That's what we're living with. It is fundamentally flawed. It's, I would say, broken. It's doing lots of harms. We're here to talk about the harms to young children, but look at the harm it's done to society generally, to just civil, respectful discourse. Look at what it's doing to democracies. We're ungovernable now. Look what it's done to truth, trust, because of mis and disinformation. The technology is getting more and more powerful. And by the way, don't be fooled by this generative artificial intelligence. It's a marketing thing as much as anything else. It's the same technology, but more powerful version, with the same companies being the only ones that have the data and the compute power to benefit. So if you agree that things are not great right now, and that real harms are being done to kids, for example, it's not going to get better by just making it more powerful. It's going to get worse unless we fix it. So the point we try to make, and coming from a infrastructure perspective, is if we have another protocol that actually gives us as individuals agency, ownership, and control of our data, and we all adopt it, then the internet becomes ours again. And then we have the ability to control the usage of our data, who gets to use it for what purpose. And the new apps that get built are clicking on those terms of use. We're not clicking absurdly on these terms of use from these platforms that none of us read. So I think there's a fundamental fix. And interestingly, the engineering fix is the easy part. It's actually getting people to understand what's at stake, connecting the problems with technology to all these other problems we're having. And what's, just sadly a fact is that it's actually kids killing themselves that's getting politicians to pay attention to this. It's kids harming themselves that's getting people to wake up to this. I mean, really? That's what it should take? That we're taking and addicting young children, okay, unknowingly to these platforms, and it's rewiring their brains and disabling a whole generation to be able to be actors in the world, active citizens in the world. This is a gigantic crisis. And it's something that we need to be very, very mindful of and very vocal about. Because we sit here in Davos, and there's a lot of presence of big tech here. And, generative AI is one of the, big 4 themes this year. It's the big shiny thing, the new thing. Well, it's I think, time for us to understand that everything we love and care about, especially our children, is being harmed and hurt by the technology that we're celebrating. And I think we need to call it out. And by the way, it is fixable. It's not like we can't address this and fix this. And I would say, lastly, that the power, however, to fix it is in your hands. People need to engage in this. This needs to become a movement, quite frankly, to change this. Because we know big tech on its own is not going to fix it. You pointed that out. I do think politicians are more aware because of their own children. But how are they doing so far at fixing it? So I do think we need all of the above, to point out the problems, to have the regulation, to fix the tech, and to create that movement.
So I'm trying to think how we bring all this together. One of the things that we focus on in the book, that Frank and I, is this idea of our data being a human right. That it's really, people tend to think of data as this obscure thing, and it's hard to get emotional about data. But we live in a digital world where every really of our actions in the world, whether what we buy, who we befriend, who we talk to, all of it is tracked. All of it has become digital. So it is actually you. It's your personhood. So this is where we're sort of trying to make this argument that essentially we are, in the same way that it was untenable in the 18th century to stand up and say that I have a property right over a human being, and you can make those contracts null and void. We try to make the argument that, you know what, you can't own that data, big tech, because it is us. It is a breach of human rights. Where I want to take this back to the children piece of this, because I think the thing that really resonates on that human right issue is precisely what you guys have been talking about, the actual harm being done. It's a way to say, look, it's an abuse. It's an absolute abuse of human beings. So Mitch, I'd like maybe, because it seems some of the struggle to some extent has been to get, to Frank's point as well, about how do we get everybody involved. The tech is not the hard part, it's this sort of social movement in some respects. And so the understanding of the problem seems to have been, and maybe it's making progress now, Gaia, but it seems that for some time, even being able to identify the cause and effect was challenging. And maybe talk through that, and then sort of how, maybe we're moving beyond that now, how do we then get this human right aspect of this going?
I think we've made some movement. I think there's more that we have to do than what we have done. There are many different ways that we can think about the multiple prongs that need to be attached to this. We can talk about, to get teachers to think about digital media literacy built into schools. We don't have any science to indicate what digital media literacy programs work, which ones are actually harming. There are 100 different versions of this curriculum out there right now. We don't know which ones are most likely to work. We need synthesis, we need science on that. Parents are alarmed. Our own research coming out of the Winston Center demonstrated that adolescents' brains were literally developing in different ways during the adolescent transition because of the time that they were spending online. That paper in particular seemed to get quite a lot of attention because it did create that link in demonstrating that this wasn't just affecting how much kids were spending time not looking at their parents, it was actually changing the way that their brains were developing. And what we're hearing from the parent side of this is complete helplessness. A feeling of being overwhelmed, overpowered by a tech industry, and watching their children they're unable to parent their children. They're unable to stop their kids from using tech. Tech has taken them over to the extent that parents feel completely helpless. I think that to create this movement, it's going to be really important to re-empower parents and help them understand that they have a remarkable amount of control as consumers, through parental controls at the very least, but as a force that can create social movement in the same way that we have for so many other things. Drunk driving is a great example of where we really changed the norms and empowered moms and students to create new norms. Public education campaigns around smoking, incidentally paid for by the tobacco industry, to really change those norms. I think that's the scope of movement that we need, and perhaps the tech industry should similarly pay for it.
Yeah, I mean, Gaia, what the tech industry paying for it would be part of your prescription, I would imagine. How do we make them pay for it?
how do you make? I think we also first have to see how we got here. Like, how come this is 2024, and basically smartphones and social networks sort of took off in 2009. So how come only now there's so much activity? And it's interesting. When I started this outreach program in 2017, people were not aware yet. We were a bit like the frog in the water. Nobody woke up in the morning and said, oh, I want to be on my phone for 5 hours, and I want my teen to be on their computer or their screens for 8 hours a day. We just didn't notice it happening. And it was not completely... the tech companies had several strategies to use, and I've put in part of my concern is they'll keep using them. So basically, first of all, they chose not to fix what was wrong. So when they had their own internal research and they knew that certain things were a problem, for example, they knew that their algorithms leads to increased loneliness and negative body images, negative moods for kids, they opted not to fix it until very recently, there was a threat of certain legal measures. They also, for the last 2 days, I've been hearing a lot the term digital well-being. Now, I think people mean very different things when they use the term digital well-being. And I think the tech industry used this term in order to shift the responsibility from them to us. So what did they do? They gave us measures that do not help. And for example, they gave us parental controls. Parental controls do not work. They keep changing them, so even if you master them, they change again. The kids know how to master them better. This is not a coincidence. Then they gave us information about how much time we spent on our devices. So I wake up every Sunday and I get a notification that I spent 4.5 hours on my phone. I don't really care, I keep going. So they gave, on Instagram, they gave an option for somebody to put their maximum time, but it was very easy to dismiss it. It was nothing stopping kids from going on for longer. So basically, I think there's a big problem with saying that we want to change things and knowing that there's no transparency. There are all these efforts of saying we're fixing things, but we're not really doing anything. I think I've studied Mark Zuckerberg's, blogs and statements. He had a formula to it. Every time something went wrong, he immediately apologized. He said he cared about privacy so much, and he's fixing it right away. And it was something small. The one thing they never fixed was the addictive features, which are the central of the
business model, right?
Yeah, business model. So I think laws can put pressure to change things, but I think it's a very uphill battle.
I want to bring you in a moment, Frank, the business model, but it just got me thinking to go back to Mitch here, because this frog in the water analogy that Gaia used, right? I think it's I think we all can relate to this if you think hard about it, right? Everybody assumes they have control. There is this. No one wants to say, "Oh, I'm making decisions. I'm choosing what to read. I'm not." Right. The idea that you can sort of almost give up the understanding that you actually don't have self-control, that this is an addiction, right? That's a difficult thing in narcotics addictions. It's a very difficult thing in social media because there's not even a narrative around this as being some sort of problem. How do we deal with that? The idea that we've lost our free will is not something any of us likes to admit, but in fact it is a core part of the problem, no?
I think we have to acknowledge the generational issues here, and I think we have to, as adults, take a hard look at ourselves. And the reason why I say this is, so we, in our research work, we took the DSM criteria for cocaine dependency. We took out the word cocaine and we put the word social media in instead, and we asked the exact diagnostic criteria. Then we asked undergraduates and young people how much they believed that they were, for instance, unable to stop themselves from using even when they wanted to, going to extremes to make sure they had ongoing use at times when they might have had a natural break, experiencing withdrawal symptoms that interfered with their day when they couldn't get on. over half indicated that they were endorsing at least one of those symptoms. In a college sample, we had over 80% endorsing every one of those symptoms. So we gave that feedback to them and said, how do you feel about this? I said, well, I'm addicted to caffeine too. Who cares? And that was what was really interesting to us, is that they said, this is about social interaction. And I want to have social interaction. And this is the only way you can have social interaction. And for, me to give a boomer example of, we used to talk on the telephone, we used to meet at the water well, is of no interest, because especially after COVID, which was an accelerator, I think, and that frog water, went up a few degrees quite rapidly then, there's a cohort of youth that just doesn't know of another way. So to tell them to not use social media is to say, you can't have any social interaction. And I think we have to detach that. There are a variety of ways. But let's be honest, I think we also have to acknowledge the role of adults. There's a construct in psychological science now called technoference. It's the extent to which young children report that their parents care more about their phones than them, their children, because the kids notice that their parents are looking at their phone when they're trying to get their own parents' attention. What message does that send? And we've all done it. I don't want to vilify anyone or make anyone feel bad. We've all been in the situation where we have used our devices more than we would like, and we have been distracted at the dinner table ourselves. It happens, but we're sending a very clear message. So when we tell kids that they're addicted, they say, well, sure, so are my parents, so are all my friends, so are my teachers. So I think we have to take a pretty hard look at some of the data and ourselves to acknowledge this.
But again, built into the business model, Frank, right? That then this sort of idea of the addiction, now the dopamine release, right? You've even got guys like Sean Parker admitting on the record that was the plan, to actually use a dopamine hit with each like on Facebook to keep people engaged. So, and I also like Mitch's point that we just can't turn off the internet, right? It is the way things are, and a lot of good things that the internet has delivered us. So, can we create an environment, can we create a technological framework in which we can have our cake and eat it too? That there is a healthy way for people to actually engage, for kids to learn, to get information, to reach out to their friends, but not be subjected deliberately to this manipulative, algorithmic transformation that is part of the current model.
Yeah, of course we can. And, just listening to you all talk, I'm just, reminded of the stories that the true stories that we all hear and have heard about how the creators of these products in Silicon Valley won't let their children use the product, right? So that's, to me, is the clearest indication of all of the harms to children. There's harms to all of us occurring because this technology is ubiquitous, right? This is a something that's become very, very much a part of our lives. And, Project Liberty is hugely bullish on technology and what is capable and what it's capable of. But it recognizes that technology is simply a tool that gets, and how it's used, what it's optimized for is the key. As a builder, I'll use a building example. A hammer is a tool, right, that someone could go out and build a house with, or someone could go out and kill somebody with the same tool. So it's just a tool, and how it is used is key. I think one of the differences with what we're talking about versus even, tobacco or drugs and so on and so forth is that this, because of how this has all evolved and because of the value of the data that I referred to earlier, we have been reduced to data. We're not persons on these platforms in the minds of the big platforms. We're just data. So we have been dehumanized, and so we're seeing what the impact is, not just on kids, but on society, on our governing models, and everything else. When you dehumanize us, what civilization has kind of historically done is it has advanced because we've gotten smarter with more information and more dissemination of information and just a march. We've not been perfect, but we've progressed. We're actually regressing now. You can see it. You can see what's happening. The technology is advancing, and it's all relatively recent, as you pointed out a few times. But look at what's happening as, the basic rights that people have fought for being taken away, disappearing. It's creating a very crude, mean-spirited, regressive behavior, and this is a huge issue because it's not like something that you kind of choose to smoke or not smoke, and you have a set of rules around that, and it's bad for you, but some people choose to do it anyway. There's no choice. We need to be connected. We're not giving up the internet. And we shouldn't be asked to give up our personhood for the right to use it. We should have an internet that actually respects us as human beings and the things that we value and care about, like our children. And so we need to just rethink it in a way that we're optimizing for, keeping kids safe, civil discourse, healthy democracies, and so forth. Autocratic, centralized, surveillance, addictive, predatory technology is not conducive to healthy children. It's not conducive to healthy democracies. Now, if you want to be an autocracy, I would say autocratic technology is pretty awesome, right? And so this is a big issue. And again, what to me I think is so important about the work here around children and getting parents involved is it becomes a kitchen table issue. Not an issue for Davos, not an issue for it's tech. I don't understand it. I just want my social media. I want my. We need to make this a kitchen table issue. And if the issue is, okay, parents, you either keep your kids totally. It's your responsibility. Keep them off social media, or let them have everything, the good, the bad with the good. That's a false choice. We need to create a new model where kids can be connected, but not in a toxic environment. And so one of the things that we're doing with Project Liberty is we have two programs going on. One with Deb Roy at MIT and another with Jonathan Train at Harvard, where they're each building apps right now using this new protocol for kids. They're both highly familiar with. Jonathan is at at Berkman Klein, and Deb was head of global for Twitter. He understands how all this works, and they're sick of and tired of what's going on. So they're going to build apps that kids can use that actually interoperate, right, and that demonstrate the power and the possibilities of a new internet that doesn't create this false choice where you're either all on or all off. You can be on something healthy that parents will be delighted. Look, I'm old enough to know when Sesame Street was the thing that my older kids could watch on television, right? Television was not so healthy, particularly when cable came along. However, if you were watching, Sesame Street in the United States, for those of you familiar with that, which was public broadcasting, and it was programming that was designed to entertain and educate young kids. So if my little kids were watching Sesame Street, I wasn't like super worried, right? I didn't let them watch other things or tried not to have them watch other things. Now every kid is walking around, not with just a television, but a supercomputer, right? And if we say you can't have it, their friends have it. They're not, everybody has it. So to think that we're going to take the responsibility off these tech companies and put it on the shoulders of parents is just unfair.
Right.
It's just not correct.
Yes, Mitch.
You talk about the internet as a tool, and I just want to extend that idea from what we know from psychological science about social connections. But let me first talk about fruit. Fruit is very sweet. It's delicious. The reason why is because it's a nutrient delivery system. And we as humans are biologically primed to want to eat that sweet, delicious fruit because it actually is evolutionarily evolved to get nutrition into us. Social media is often pitched as being a social connection delivery system. But we have to think about this in a different way because humans found a way to get around fruit, and that was candy. You can get all the sweetness with none of the nutrition. Social media is the empty calories of human social connection. It gives us the appearance of social connection. But in our research, what we learn is that kids find it to not create an opportunity for emotional vulnerability, companionship, intimacy, true companionship, or a real disclosure. In fact, in many cases, they don't have a relationship with a human at all, with just a number of how many people liked or followed them. And in our research, we also find that in the hour after kids use social media, they actually report an increase in loneliness. So what we're really finding here scientifically is that we've taken the essence of what's important with social connection, and we've created this candy delivery system to give us this sensation that we might be engaging in social connection, but we're really not. And that's where we need to teach parents and kids and others the idea that although this seems like it's something that's meant to help us as a species, it's actually not. For those of you that know anthropology research, we're not the only human-like species that were on the planet 100,000 years ago. There were several other hominids that could have been here instead of us. The only reason why Homo sapiens survived to this day is because we had a genetic alteration in our larynx that allowed us to have language and become a social species. When you talk about the extent to which this is an aspect of our humanity, it literally is the only reason why we're here, many would argue, and it's being stripped away.
Look, very, very powerful representation. That analogy is very powerful. We got, and Mitch probably should have just gone to you, but Anna Lemke's work was really quite profound, I thought, in this. And so, we referred to her in the book, who talks about social media being a hypodermic needle in your pocket. And I think the analogy of that addiction and then the coming down afterwards, and that sort of all the way that the adrenal gland releases dopamine in that way to keep moving things on, and how it's a huge part of it is it deserves so much more attention than it gets, because it's the means by which we lose control. But I want to take that analogy and just push it on a different level, look at this from the economics again, to you, Gaia, because there's another addiction in a metaphorical sense at least, and that is the addiction of our economic system to data. And Frank and I came up with the term in the book, the data industrial complex. And in fact, one of the most alarming, little data points that we picked up on was that children's apps, right, like Peppa Pig, for example, in the UK, very, very popular show, has its own app, collects data on the children's behavior, and then sells it to the platforms. Like, there's an entire industry of data brokers.
Just Peppa Pig.
It's not just Peppa Pig. I don't just call out them. They're just an example. But it's just a nice, this cute little pig, right? It's just, that's why we use the analogy. It's all across the board. In fact, I think there's data in there about how absolutely pervasive the sale of children's information by these apps are to the data platforms. And in the middle of it, there are data brokers. There are actually a lot of the credit scoring companies like Equifax and the like. They actually play huge data selling roles as intermediaries in this thing. So we've actually built an entire economy around this particular model. So again, I'm asking you to solve all the biggest problems, Gaia. How do we unravel all of that?
So first of all, I agree that this is about humanity. I want to note something important here. All the tech companies, most of them are American, and maybe some are Chinese, they're not European. If you look at the European system, there's much more emphasis on privacy as a human right. That's not the case in the US. In the US, most privacy lawsuits failed. Many privacy laws, the new ones are challenged. Why? Because it only looks at harm. So while you can talk about rights and human value, if you want to make progress in the US legal system, you need to talk about harm, which is basically the stuff that Mitch is talking about. What's the causation? How is this affecting kids? And so I think that's one thing. The other thing is, I agree, there's a huge industry built around kids. There's a study that came out of Harvard, I think last week, that showed that just social media companies make about $11 billion of selling advertisement to kids. So basically, you need to put pressure on this. And it's not, there are many ways to go about this. Every time that because basically the model has two legs. You can think about it as a chair with two legs, if that's even possible. So there's the leg that's data, and there's the leg that's our time. Every time you chip on one of these, the whole structure starts shaking. And we've seen much more progress on the privacy side. The GDPR, even though it's a European law, it affects international companies and US companies that work in Europe. So that makes a difference. The Federal Trade Commission recently came out with proposed rules to restrict advertising to children and collection of data to children. That makes a difference as well, even though it's not directly looking at how we addict kids. It makes the whole business model less lucrative, because if you collect less data, if you can't advertise, you have to start thinking about something else. We have antitrust action. Antitrust action takes years. I think there's nothing as slow as antitrust action. It doesn't always succeed, but the idea is that if you are successful, eventually you might create more competition in the market, which might produce innovation with new business model. Now, part of the problem is that the only obvious business model people are thinking about right now is the subscription business model. And even though we are used to paying for things, we don't like paying for Gmail or for Facebook. We're just not used to it. And on the other hand, we are paying for streaming and networks, and we're paying for many, many other services. So, and that may not be the only business model. Think about if we come up with a business model like pay as you go. Can you imagine a child going in a social network? And it's a bit like when they go to the amusement park. They have to pay for their rides. If they have to pay even a small amount for every hour they spend on social network, this might change things. And so what I was trying to say is that the more you make it less profitable to use this business model, the more you might see shift, which will enable many of the innovations you're talking about. But I think it's very hard to make it, especially also with the critical mass we have. It's very hard to move people away from Instagram or from Facebook at this point. You need to shake things around before you can do that.
Yeah, I think that a couple of things dawn on me as listening to you. One is that I like to think of consent more than like privacy, because privacy is one thing. But if we return the ownership and control of our data to each of us, then we decide what to do with that data. Some people give up their privacy, but that's a choice. They've done it with consent. Right now, we have an internet where it's an all or nothing proposition, right? Let's not kid ourselves. We are surveilled, whether 24/7. It's not like, oh, I don't use social media, therefore I'm safe. No, we have smart devices in our homes, right? We have cars that are like, basically smartphones on wheels now, right? It's sucking up, it is extracting information from us. We walk down streets, surveilled. All of this data is being collected and going fundamentally to the same places and then being used. So what I'm suggesting is the intervention needs to be at a different place, at a different layer. It's giving us back what's ours, right? It's not complicated, really. We're creating the power and the value in the internet. So give it back to us and let people decide how they want to approach privacy, how they want to approach these different issues, because there's lots of issues. Some people may say, I don't want anything, you can't use my data for anything. Some other people may say, I don't care, you can use my data for whatever you want. Most people, I think, will say, you know what, if my data is being used to cure a disease, a global health issue or crisis or the next novel coronavirus, you can use my data anonymously for that, happily. But if you're using my data to go make billions of dollars, it's a different story. I want to be involved in that. On the economic model, I would comment, rather than trying to restrict what these companies can do and kind of like choke them to death, I would suggest we now know the power of the internet and the possibilities. We're not giving it up, so that's out of the question. I've met with Mr. Breton when he talked about GDPR and DMA and DSA, and I said, what's your remedy if these big platforms just violate your new rules? He said, oh, I have the solution. What is that? I can shut them down. Oh, really? Okay, there's riots on the streets in Paris changing the retirement age by 2 years. Okay, you're going to like say no more internet, and that's going to be, you solve that problem, you create much bigger problems. The point is, we need, I believe, a new model because we know how valuable the data is now. It's massively valuable. It's not like we don't want to aggregate data. We want to solve problems. We want to create value. We just want a different economy that is more valuable than these monopolies have created because we're all in it, but we all share in it. So one of the things that we're going to be very, very focused on with Project Liberty is bringing in the best economic minds in the world to actually talk about what does a shared data economy look like? How can we all benefit from that? It's massively valuable stuff, by the way, that you all are giving away for free. Lastly, this idea of free apps drives me crazy because the price we're paying is the health of our kids. That's not free. Okay? We're paying a big, big price for this free stuff. And it's bad stuff. So I just think it's a fundamental shift we need to make in how we think about this. Mitigating something that's broken. To say, okay, we're going to make it less broken or squeeze it to death or, spend all of our time and energy at fixing the things that this broken internet is harming. This is insanity. Fix the internet, fix the tech, have us all benefit. It's our internet. It was built to be a decentralized thing, not built to be owned by a few platforms. And I think it's time to take it back.
All right, on that call to action, we're actually going to open it up to the floor, to questions. If we don't mind, I just one little prompt on this, and it just occurs to me that because we're talking about maybe a new economy that needs to come out of this, right? And changing the business model. You've heard that talk a little bit. In our book, we suggest that like if everybody owned their data, we don't know what business models could be created, but you're effectively creating an entirely new set of property rights. And history has shown that when that happens, big things happen, right? There's this entirely new dynamic economy happens when there's no intermediaries in the middle of that. So it could be very, very powerful. But the point is, here in Davos, you walk up and down the street, you'll see all of these big corporate entities. Some of them are the platforms, but a lot of them are just involved in the economy. So part of how I would say, this is a civil action. We need everybody involved. We need some of those companies. We need those companies to get in and see that their own fortunes are actually on the side of this sort of stuff. So with that in mind, I'm going to open up to, you can ask whatever question you want, but I just think like we are here in Davos where those powerful entities are here. I would ask you, how do we take the action to them? Anyway, but feel free to ask this wonderful panel whatever questions. And Margaret, you do have the rights to the very first question. Thank you.
Okay, about the data, it's clear, and you are the experts to speak about it. I just want to say the example what happened this morning here in conversation with one guy who works for a tech company, but not big one. And he was very proud in our conversation to tell us how the company is now developing gadget system, because of course all of us are worried about our children, to help the parents to take care of their children. There's a gadget which should be put on the child rest, which shows when the child is in anxiety because it's sweating, the heart is beating, and the parents should be okay. The child, for example, is sitting behind the screen and doing all, and the parents have alarm. The child is in distress. We have to shut down. So he cares for the children, and he was speaking about it pretty positively. But for me, of course, it was a red flag, because I said, okay, this is what would be dream, as we speak, everybody has a dream, and I have a dream that in every company, the way how we speak today about climate change, before you are taking decision, before you are developing something, you are thinking about consequences on the climate, on the planet. We should think the same about our humanity, human change. So I asked him, can you imagine what does it mean for the parents, for the mothers, looking at the children and not trusting anymore what you see, but checking the technology. It means that the mother brain is is reducing. It reduces capacity to look at the children and to understand. Because of course, when I look at my children, I see are they tired, are they sick, are they need something. But if I will start to rely on this gadget, I will lose this capacity. This is what our children are losing so much, so many things, so many life skills they are losing. And this guy, of course, but his reaction was very good, because he said, oh my God, we didn't think about it. And this is what I think, that all this tech industry, somehow we have to push them, that they have somebody close in their company who checks everything what they are producing in order to make our life easy. But in reality, reducing our capacity as a human being.
Well, we had a fascinating conversation before we got on here. Too brief, unfortunately, and you mentioned that the title "Human Change" is literally also about this fact. And Mitch, you talked about the physiological changes in brains and so forth. And so I think that just that call to any change having to understand, like, it's agency. It's this idea of being a human, having control and so forth, right? So I mean, that was a wonderful comment. Anybody would like to respond, feel free.
I think there's this general idea that technology is always good and will solve everything. And I think that's what's driving a lot of the conversation, that if we have a problem with technology, we have to fix it with more technology. And sometimes it's true, but sometimes it's not. And when we were talking about schools earlier today, it's also about that. I mean, people feel, how can we take technology away from kids in school? How will they develop in this world? And I think that's the narrative that we are sort of trying to balance out here.
Yeah, I do think that definitely all technology is not good, and just more tech for the sake of tech is definitely pretty mindless. I would make a point, however, that, and I could be totally wrong, but I've come to a fundamental conclusion that if we don't fix the current technology, then we're not going to solve all the other problems we have. Mm-hmm. However, if we think that just by fixing technology we solve all the other problems, we're delusional. And so, again, it's not that the tech will fix everything. It's that we have broken tech that is doing a lot of harm that we need to fix. And if we think that we're going to fix it just with regulation or just with this or just with parents taking control, I think we're just going to have it's going to be very sad to watch what happens to the future. And in what's doubly sad is it could be so great. You know, we think about we've seen this polling and this, where our kids going to have a better life than my generation, for instance. And we've seen for the, first time recently where young people are saying, I don't think my life is going to be as good as my parents, and parents saying, I'm not sure my kid's life is going to be as good. That is like, we live as human beings for our children to make a better life for you than we have. That's the driver of civilization. It's about the future. And we have technology that is destroying the future. And this is what is so fundamentally heinous about it. So if we don't fix the tech, we know we can predict the future in a pretty dystopian way. However, if we fix the tech, imagine the world that's possible. Imagine your world when artificial intelligence that's actually optimizing for you, for the right thing, allows you to live till 150 years old. Pretty cool, right? Yeah? A healthy life till 150 years old, right? It's pretty awesome. But that's not what's happening now. And this is why this is a big, big moment to like wake up. We need to wake up and fix this. The tech can be awesome, and we can, our kids can, and your kids even, right, can have awesome lives, best ever, or not.
Yes, please. Yes, do we have a mic over here? This young man.
So you talked about winning the internet back. So my question is, what would be the next step after we would reach that? I mean, I don't think personally, for example, shutting it down or social media would be an option because the people would be in big pain or lose their, for some people, their social life. So what could we do next after we reach that?
Yeah, so I think we reset it, right? So
Great question, by the way.
We all own and control our data on our internet. So we're people again, with rights again, not just data, dehumanized, not cared about. And then you build great social media networks, great use cases on this new internet. The big difference will be the new use cases that are built. I won't be clicking on your terms of use in that new app you build. You'll be clicking on my terms of use to use my data. You see? So it's flipping it so that the rights are yours as a user of somebody's application. And let's stop calling them users. Users are things people you use or take drugs, right? Addicts. Let's call them people. We're people. It's our internet. We're people on the internet. Let's create a new language, a new paradigm, where this thing is like so awesome. It's magnetic, and we all want to use it because it's healthy and good, and we benefit financially, and you're building great things and living longer lives. Like, is it for real that we're talking about technology that's killing children and that we're not doing anything about it? It's completely nuts.
Okay, another one up there. Yes, please.
So first of all, thank you for your wisdom, and as I peer around the column here. There is a gentleman at Microsoft named Jaron Lanier, who's the chief octopus. I think the prime unifying scientist is his title. Right. And he's presented as a solution data dignity, which is, I believe, if I understand it right, is data as labor. So what is your thought around data dignity or data as labor as a potential solution? In other words, behavioral economics. That's how you get paid as you move forward.
Yeah, I've talked too much, so I'm going to give you 30 seconds and then pass it along, or maybe to you, Michael. But the name of the book, it is our biggest fight, but it's reclaiming liberty, humanity, and dignity in the digital era. Okay, so this is what it's about, and we are all powering, right? All this value that's created for these companies, it's off our backs. You know, all those hours you spend on social media, your data, that's what's powering this. You're not getting, paid for it. I guess you get a free app, right? That's cool. But the point is, the amount of data that's being created as we're sitting here is massive amounts of data. And that's what's driving large language models. That's what's creating all the value, because the data gets aggregated. Algorithms are applied, and so on and so forth. So this is very undignified labor, right? We're actually working for nothing, and there's a lot of value that we can share.
So if you don't, this is one of the moments where I would put my sort of like co-author hat on, because I'm not an economist, but I like to say I play one on TV. I've covered economics all my life as a journalist. And so it's been very interesting to talk with people about this moment. And I love the expression data dignity. One of the things I think, though, that we need to be careful of is the idea. So just to backtrack, one of the Project Liberty fellows, Sandy Pentland, makes the argument that data should be thought of as the fourth factor of production, right? Factors of production, this is actually a term that Marx came up with, right? It's land, labor, and capital. But now we live in a world where data is, in fact, the fourth one. And so if you think about it that way, you start to be, okay, what are the economics around that? And so he talks about the idea that we need data collectives. because we can form alliances with each other around what we all care about together and increase our bargaining power. I like to think it's a little bit like the cooperatives that form around farmers, right? Now no longer are we working for the feudal lord. We all want to sell our own crops, but if we get together, we get more bargaining power. So these are some of the ideas that are coming up. What I think is really important, though, is and this gets back to the American project concept that really is a big theme through our book, that when we think about individual rights, it needs to be thought of as well about self-actualization, this idea that this is an opportunity for you to make something of yourself with your data. And I think one of the narratives that does emerge around how do we solve this problem that we're all working in some way and providing value to these companies not getting anything in return, there's this idea about UBI, right? Universal basic income, which I think is appealing on one level, right? It's like we all deserve a fair income, and that as participants in this digital economy, that would be one way to reward us. But it feels to me as if it's a cop-out. Like it's actually, you don't matter anymore. It's a little bit about what Margarita was saying, is you're no longer a parent. A device is doing it for you, right? Get your UBI. You're going to be okay. Shut up. We, the big companies, will look after it, right? What I think is far more important is that it's your data. You have control over it, and you can make something with it, right? I think it's just that distinction is important as we have this debate. It's a well-framed concept, but it can lead us down one path or another path.
I think we're all worried about what's going on, but we are worried about slightly different things. I think, for me, the main thing I'm worried about is the loss of autonomy. And when I'm talking about autonomy, I'm talking about it in two ways. First of all, autonomy about how we spend our time, which is basically the most important thing we have. Like if we lose 8 hours a day doing mindless surfing, I think that is part of the problem. That's one thing I worry about. And I also think about autonomy as a means to an end. So the idea is that if we have autonomy, we will choose good things for ourselves. I mean, if we could have predicted in 2009 of what would happen to our children, I don't think any of us would have chosen this. So yes, I'm worried about data. I care less about data in the sense of, do I want to own my data? I'm worried about what companies wanting to own this data is doing to us and where it's leading us in terms of autonomy. But I think that on my hierarchy, autonomy is actually the most important thing here.
Yeah, Mitch, final words with you to wrap up.
I'll just say I'm not an economist, nor do I play one on TV, but I have countless hours of experience working directly with children, including middle school children. And this is not a solution, but perhaps part of a grand, set of solutions. I'd just like to share with you the experience of opening up the App Store in front of middle school students and scrolling to the privacy section and teaching children about what you're calling, or what sounds like Microsoft is calling, data dignity. The look on young children's faces when they realize that the innocuously seeming weather app is doing a lot more than just telling them the weather. The look of betrayal on their faces, that why would adults take my information? And why are they selling it? And then they ask me, how much of that do I get? How much money do I get for that? The basic fundamental understanding of what's right, what's fair, and suddenly having that veil lifted for them and seeing that begins a conversation to help them enter into this world with their eyes just a little bit more wide open, the recognition that adults didn't make these platforms to be nice to them, but to make a profit, and hopefully is the beginning of what could be a lifelong conversation with them understanding the ownership of their digital phenotype, the importance of their privacy. And let's not leave out direct communication to kids about this too, because in my experience, that is the beginning of what could be a very powerful conversation.
Thank you.
So that like this, I could see a few hands up. Unfortunately, we have to wrap this up, but I think people are sticking around a little bit to maybe have a continued conversation. Great questions, a tremendous panel. A round of applause for my three panelists, please.